Hey everyone, and welcome to the Battle for Azeroth Beta Class Review Series. In this 12-part video series, I'm going to be going through every class in the game, one by one, every spec. We'll be covering the changes, I'll be giving you my thoughts, and primarily it's going to be focused on design and fun, not flavor of the month numbers. I've actually got some great news. This series is sponsored by the great people over at Icy Veins. They're gearing up for Battle for Azeroth, and their first wave of class guides will fully launch with the pre-patch. They've actually recruited 26 new writers for this expansion, so they're really going to be good to go on day one. Of course, I've used Icy Veins for years personally, and their work has been instrumental both in making this class review series and the Legion one, and I expect the future ones as well, so be sure to check them out, and you can check out the Icy Vein Hunter guides in the description below. Today we are taking a look at the Hunter, and this class has got 2 spec revamps, plus a pretty meaningful set of tweaks to Beast Mastery and a new pet system. It also used to be my main before I jumped ship over to the Monk and Legion, so I'm dead keen to see where this class stands in Battle for Azeroth. And I'm going to kick it off with the pet changes. So now all pets do the same amount of damage, and each pet type has an active and a passive ability. So Ferocity will give you 10% Leech passive, and will also give you Primal Rage, which is basically Bloodlust. Then Cunning increases your movement speed by 8% passive, and also gives you Master's Call, which removes movement impairing effects and makes you immune to them for 4 seconds, which is dead handy for preventing some inconvenient DPS losses. And then Tenacity gives you a passive health boost and an active ability, which is a damage mitigating one, which is really handy. So that's that done. Let's take a look at the specs themselves. And the first one that we're going to cover is Survival. So Legion binned WoD Survival, BFA pretty much is binning Legion Survival, but it is, learning a few lessons from it and working some of the successes back into the spec. Now, I can't really just cover the key changes here like I would normally do for a spec that's been tweaked, because really the whole thing is different here, and I kind of love a lot of what they're doing, so we're going to jump right into it with the explainer. So Survival is still a melee spec, but we can use some of our kit at range, which gives us more options. We still use Focus as our resource, and most of our focus will be going into Raptor Strike. Raptor Strike was a pretty underwhelming filler that played second fiddle to Mongoose in Mongoose Bite and Legion. Not the case anymore, it hits like a truck, and it's pretty much your big single target nuke. You'll also be dotting up targets with Serpent Sting, which is back and is ranged. The duration isn't that long, so you'll be using it pretty frequently. And then we've got Wildfire Bomb. You throw a bomb at the target, the bomb explodes, it does light damage, but it applies a strong dot that hits like a truck over a few seconds. As for Focus, well, we do regenerate it passively, but it's kind of slow. So your main focus source is Kill Command. Yep, Kill Command generates focus for this spec, and it has a chance to reset its own cooldown, which means you can chain them together. As for AoE, that's when we mix in Carve, because it reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 1 second for every target that it hits. This results in an uptick in pace in AoE that feels really aggressive and satisfying. And then finally, we've got Coordinated Assault, which is our new main cooldown. It increases your damage and the damage of your pet, and it also increases the frequency at which Kill Command resets its cooldown. So overall, a big lump of damage and also a focus regen boost. And then we've also got the rather interesting aspect of Eagle, which makes Raptor Strike usable at range, which allows us to do our full rotation from a distance. Pretty great for on-demand target swapping or being able to maintain a bit of uptime where other melee wouldn't be able to. So that's the bread and butter of your damage dealing, but there's a lot more to it than that. We've got some great baseline abilities such as Harpoon, which closes us in with a target. We've got Disengage, which is back for SV as a baseline ability. Intimidate is baseline, giving you a great single target stun. Misdirection is also in, which is more relevant than ever given the changes to tank threat. So overall, it's a pretty robust kit that only gets better with their excellent talent choices. So, time for the talents. On the 15 tier, we're immediately given impactful choices. Viper's Venom gives your Raptor Strike a chance to proc a free Serpent Sting that deals 100% extra initial damage. I think this is perhaps a more simple choice, but it's one that adds in some unpredictability if you want it. Then Terms of Engagement soups up Harpoon, causing it to deal damage, generate 30 focus over a period of time, and have its CD reset if the target is killed, which is dead handy for leveling, but I think other options would be a bit more popular for endgame. Now, Alpha Predator Predator is pretty simple. It puts kill command on a charge system. Now, having 2 charges to play, it eases up the rotation and it lets you set up more ideal, say, coordinated assaults. Now, tier 30 gets really meaningful. We've got Guerrilla Tactics, which gives you 2 charges of Wildfire Bomb. Of course, don't use them back to back because you'll just waste them, but this, along with the previously mentioned Alpha Predator, they give you a lot of leeway in how you use your resources, which lets you better allocate them. Then we've got Hydra's Bite. It causes Serpent Sting to hit 2 additional targets, and it's a little bit smart where the additional bolts will prefer targets that don't already have the dot, so that's dead handy for spreading around the love in AoE, and it's probably a decent combo with Viper's Venom. Now, Butchery fills the same niche as it did in Legion, being a strong AoE on a charge system. Now, 45, that tier is simple utility, nothing super amazing. So 60 starts off with Bloodseeker, and it adds a bleed to your kill command, but more importantly, it causes you to get an attack speed increase of 10% for every bleeding enemy in 10 yards. So if you've got Alpha Predator, then you can spread these bleeds out quite effectively, but interestingly, Azeroth points out that this counts bleeds from other players, so maybe you could do some group synergy there. It's probably just a passive that you'll sort of benefit from, but that's pretty cool. Then we've got Steel Trap and Murder of Crows, which are pretty much the same as Legion, so there's not too much to talk about there. Then the 75 tier, more utility, Binding Shot, which is now a root, not a stun. We've got Born to be Wild, which is a simple CD reduction, and Post Haste, which is its usual self. 90 is where things get really interesting though. So Tip of the Spear causes kill command to give you a buff that increases the damage of your next Raptor Strike, stacking up to 3 times. Then Mongoose Bite is back, but it replaces Raptor Strike, so yeah, it works pretty much the same way that it does in Legion. So really these 2 talents are about what flavor of main nuke that you want. Mongoose is a bit more involved, Tip of the Spear is a bit more simple, but they're both quite satisfying. And then we cap the tier off with Flanking Strike. It adds a big attack every 40 seconds that generates 40 focus and also moves you. But I'd almost definitely go with one of the other 2 options on this tier. And finally, we have the 100 tier. We kick it off with Birds of Prey, which causes Raptor Strike and Carve to increase the duration of coordinated assault by 2 seconds, and that really does extend it a lot. We then got Chakrams, which is a standalone ability that doesn't really chatter with the rest of the spec. You just throw them out, they deal some damage. There's a little bit of gameplay in how you aim them, of course. They're just the type of thing, you know, they kind of shine in realistic gameplay like a dungeon, and less so on a target dummy. And then we've got the star of the show, in my view, Wildfire Infusion. This thing is so cool. Your Wildfire Bomb will give you a buff for 6 seconds. Now, in combat, you can tell what buff it's going to give you by looking at the spell icon. So it causes, well, one of them causes your Raptor Strikes to leave a bleed that stacks up to 3 times. Another causes extra damage to poison targets and refreshes Serpent Sting. And then another one gives your kill command a 100% chance to refresh its own cooldown, which floods you with resources. And if you've got Alpha Predator, it's going to leave you with 2 charges of kill command ready to go. And I love this talent. It's just so damn cool and how it changes up the pace of the spec. It always gives you something to play around. It may be like Marmite for some people and how it works, but personally, I really like it. So overall, the talents are pretty great, and one thing you'll notice is you can kind of go broad or deep, so you can go for a wide range of abilities, you know, like your Chakrams and your Murder of Crows and just a whole bunch of stuff, or you could focus on augmenting the core rotation with Alpha Predator, Guerrilla Tactics, and Wildfire Infusion. You can also then choose between different playstyles and levels of complexity with stuff like, again, Alpha Predator, Viper's Venom, Mongoose Bite, Tip of the Spear. This talent tree essentially just accomplishes so much gameplay variety that it makes it feel like a very versatile spec. It's also a fantastic example of Blizzard learning the right lessons from the Legion version of survival, which is certainly a good thing. So overall, kind of love this guy. Leaping around the place with Harpoon and having Disengage is great, it feels really freeing, as does the ability to be semi-useful at range. Now, the core rotation is super engaging, especially because you can kind of build it to your tastes, such as, you know, maybe a single target raid build. Like there's one there that I'd really enjoy. There's a Mythic Plus AoE build that I also really enjoy. The versatility is fantastic, and AoE can be particularly fun because of Carve cooldown reduction mechanic. It feels super aggressive to execute, and it's a great break of pace from the usual single target stuff, especially if you've got Butchery, which is, as you know, as it was in Legion, it's still a very satisfying button to hit. The only negative for me is losing the artifact ability. Now, it wouldn't work with a new survival because Mongoose Bite is a talent, but you know what, I mean, losing that one interaction is a little bit sad, but I'm pretty much fine with it overall. And yeah, this is a spec that I think is just going to fit general gameplay excellently because of the mobility and the freedom. It kind of just reduces the friction of getting shit done. And, you know, I can see that being really enjoyable in stuff like, say, Mythic Plus and Island Expeditions, as well as still fitting into raiding quite nicely. So this is actually a spec that I would be more than happy happy to play a lot of in BFA, and I'm surprised they've done it so well. Next, it is time for Marksmanship, which is yet another revamp. Now, sure, the ability names here are very similar, but man, this spec is completely different. If you dislike RNG, then Blizzard have listened to you. Marked Shot is gone, Vulnerable is gone. BFA's MM is a new, and I think more traditional era of the MM Hunter. Now, as with SV, doing key changes is pointless, and we're just going to hop right into the explainer so you understand how the new thing plays. So, Marksmanship features many of the same abilities, but they function quite differently, overall creating a new spec. Aim Shot is a great place to start off, where it now has 2 charges, a 12-second recharge, and a cast time of 2.5 seconds, and just does a bunch of damage. Then the other baseline focus spender is Arcane Shot, which is instant, does a low amount of damage, and yep, it is a spender now, not a generator. But there's an extra element to this, which is called Precise Shots. Aim Shot can make your next 1 to 2 Arcane Shots, or multi-shots, do 100% extra damage, but still cost focus. So there is a flow between the 2 spells that is shaken up slightly by you either generating 1 or 2 buff charges. So how do we generate our resources? Well, simple. You first do it with Steady Shot, which is pretty much your baseline thing, and then you've got Rapid Fire, which is a focus generator that also does a shed load of damage. Then our main DPS cooldown is True Shot, which increases haste and gives us a charge of aimed shot. So the single target gameplay is pretty simple here. It's just a case of keeping everything on cooldown, not over-generating your Precise Shots buffs. AoE gets a little bit more interesting though because of Trick Shot, which is great. So it adds some synergy between your multi-shot, your aim shot, and your rapid fire. Casting MS on 3 or more targets will cause your next aim shot to hit additional targets, or your next rapid fire to cleave up to 2 more targets. This works quite nicely, and it manages to alter the flow of AoE gameplay in a pretty satisfying manner that I have enjoyed quite a bit. As for the rest of it, well, Lone Wolf is baseline now, but you still do have the option to bring out a pet for the sake of convenience. We are relatively a bit more desirable because of misdirection, which will be appreciated by BFA tanks. Overall, I'd say that this is a pretty simple, slightly slow feeling spec at its core. The core of its gameplay is just don't waste resources, and you know what, this kind of works with it generally being slow and predictable. So if you want a more chilled out range spec, then this is probably looking good for you. But to really get into it though, we'd of course need to have a look at the talents, so let's do that. And we kick off the talents with Master Marksman. It makes your first precise shot at Arcane Shot or multi-shot cost no focus, which to me has actually been kind of annoying because Arcane Shot is often used as a focus management tool to avoid capping. Anyway, there's that, then Serpent Sting is just a dot to maintain, and Murder of Crows is its usual self. Level 30 starts off with Careful Aim. It gives your aim shots a chance to do extra damage based on enemy health, and to be honest, I find it kind of boring, but it's definitely something that will, you know, be tailored towards certain fights, so it does have strengths. Then Volley is back, but it's a bit different. It's now a 10% chance to trigger on your auto shots, which is pretty boring. And then Explosive Shot is back, but the main difference is that it doesn't have damage fall off. Either an enemy is in and receives full damage, or is out and receives none. And if you don't detonate, you get 10 focus refunded. So 2 decently dull tiers so far. 45 is just more utility that we're already used to, so let's just hop over to 60. Now, Steady Focus is pretty cool. Casting Steady Shot decreases the cast time of your next Steady Shot, and this effect stacks up to 2 times, so it incentivizes you to basically use Steady Shot back to back. Though it does have an issue that Azeroth pointed out when I bounced this script by him, and that is that the second stack of the buff makes its cast time faster than the global cooldown, which isn't particularly useful. But the core here is that it rewards you for planning out your focus regeneration, and that's kind of how you'll get more value out of this. Then Streamline extends Rapid Fire, which means even more damage and even more focus, and Hunter's Mark lets you mark a target, and you'll deal 5% more damage to that target. If the target dies, you get 20 focus back. It's really boring. I could not imagine playing with it other than for the sake of numbers. 75 is another utility tier, and you know, it just does the same as with survival, so let's move on to 90. So on 90, Lethal Shots give Steady Shot a 25% chance to make your next aim shot or rapid fire be a guaranteed crit. Playing around this was a lot more interesting, so I really like that with the spec. Then Barrage is back, works as you would expect, and Double Tap is a new, pretty interesting spell, I suppose. It's a DPS cooldown that impacts your next aim shot or rapid fire. It causes aim shot to hit twice, or rapid fire to hit fire twice as many bolts. Ideally, you want to stack this with, you know, other effects like maybe a trick shot, and to be honest, I wish this was on a different tier to lethal shots, and that it was charge based, because I think that monitoring your incoming procs so that you could double tap on them, I think that would be really fun and engaging. That said, double tapping a streamlined rapid fire with trick shots, That's pretty satisfying and is a bit of a highlight moment for the spec. Finally, we have the 100 tier, so calling the shots is your usual cooldown reduction talent that lets you do more true shots. Lock and load is back, it operates pretty much as you'd expect, but a very low proc rate, and piercing shot is back and simplified. It's basically identical in its function, just that it no longer consumes extra focus to deal more damage. So overall, what do I think? Well, it's a pretty chilled out spec that's kind of simple. The pace is slower than normal, and the abilities, none of them really stand out or are that memorable to me. It all comes back to it being kind of hard to create a unique identity for what is essentially some dude with a bow. Now, I do like trick shots, but when I compare that to, say, Meat Cleaver on a Fury Warrior and how that plays, well, I find that I appreciate the faster pace of Fury. This is an apples to oranges comparison, so I think it more just indicates what I personally want from a spec. I typically do like a faster pace, so you'd sooner find me at the helm of a Fire or a Frost Mage than this. There are some decent picks of talents though, but I mean, man, just look at the first tier. This is the bit that makes me sad. It just feels like such a waste of space, and I think it could have had other more interesting mechanics there. I wonder maybe if they just brought back Chimera Shot as a thing baseline, maybe made that the highlight of the spec, if it would be more fun. I suppose what I would say is the baseline gameplay is quite slow, but it does have good highlight moments, such as using the ideal double tap or just generally using trick shots. And the pace of the spec is something that will respond quite well to haste increases, so Bloodlust and True Shot do feel quite good. It feels robust in single target and AoE. You've got variation if you want it, like Explosive Shot, Murder of Crows, Barrage, and Piercing Shot, but you won't have enough focus regen to really do all of them, and they do struggle in how they often feel quite isolated from the other abilities, bar of course with how they play into the resource generation and spending game. So look, there certainly is customization there. For me, basically, it's a decently simple and predictable spec that does a good job of slotting into World of Warcraft, so it allows you to focus first on the content. It doesn't really excite me that much, but from what I can tell, it's been broadly received quite positively by the Hunter community, so I'm pretty much going to leave it at that. Not for me, but it doesn't make me mad or anything, and it seems like plenty of Hunters are enjoying it. And finally, we've got Beast Mastery. Yep, this is one that had a massive revamp in Legion that was very much criticized by many for being a bit in the simple side, myself included. That said, having complete freedom of movement and great burst, that's certainly enjoyable, even if the rotation wasn't always enjoyable. Unlike the other 200 specs, though, Blizzard have focused here with, on tweaks, not revamps. So I was very interested to dive into this and see how they would respond to the criticism. So let's take a look at the key changes. So if you played the spec in Legion, then you'll know about Dire Frenzy. It was a pretty popular talent, and it's one that made the spec, in my view, a lot more enjoyable. Blizzard have made it baseline for BFA. This has been done through a new ability called Barbed Shot, which is an 8-second bleed that frenzies your pet and generates 20 focus over 8 seconds, as well as decreasing the cooldown of Bestial Wrath, your main cooldown. One critique of BM was that you were really just telling your pet what to do, right, instead of making a shot. So by making this a shot, Blizzard are kind of making the damage feel more linked to your character. Also, on the back end, this frenzies your pet, which is a stacking 8-second cooldown. What's nice is that by putting a bleed on the target, that bleed lasts 8 seconds, the same as the buff in your pet. So it makes tracking that buff way easier, and I think is a very welcome change as well. And then Cobra Shot is a little bit different, and you know what? I think better. It costs 35 focus, down from 50, and it reduces the cooldown of Kill Command by 1 second, which I really like, kind of along the lines of, say, some of the Windwalker Monk tweaks. Aspect of the Wild also lasts twice as long, but generates half as much focus per second, so it's a bit more smoothed out. Other than, say, Misdirect being a bit more desirable, and Aspect of the Wild and Bestial Wrath being on the cooldown, it pretty much is the same as Legion, bar the talent changes. Okay, time to talk about the baseline gameplay now that we've got the key changes out of the way. And look, spoiler alert, it's pretty damn similar. So the main goal is you want to get as many kill commands off as you can, especially during your Bestial Wrath. Then, of course, Barbed Shot reduces the cooldown of Bestial Wrath and generates you focus. So the broad idea is to never be focus starved, such that you are not able to cast a kill command on cooldown, and then you want to focus on using Bestial Wrath right. Now, it is on the global cooldown, which honestly doesn't feel great to me, but it's a cooldown that increases your your damage output, so it stands to reason that your goal is you want to Bestial Wrath and then get as many kill commands inside of that Bestial Wrath window as you can. Now, Barbed Shot can have its cooldown reset by auto shot crits because of Wild Call, so that adds some unpredictability to the spec. Now, Barbed Shot also has the Frenzy mechanic that can stack up to 3 times, so the ideal gameplay here is you want to space out your usage of it so that you have as much uptime of the 3-stack pet buff as you can get. Now, it's got a 12-second recharge time, and the buff lasts for 8 seconds, but because you're getting resets through Wild Call, you should be able to eke it out quite a bit. Overall, what I think is interesting is that the combination of Barbed Shot, which of course is the old Dire Frenzy, and the cooldown reduction mechanic of the new Cobra Shot, they do start to make the spec feel a lot more involved, even though it's got a low number of buttons, and that also makes the Bestial Wrath window more interesting because you're knocking down the cooldown of your kill command. Then as for the AoE, well, it still operates based off maintaining Beast Cleave by casting multi-shot, and overall I'd say that this is a simple, fast-paced spec that has had its core gameplay improved a lot by the baselining of Dire Frenzy through Barbed Shot and the tweaks to Cobra Shot. Then, there's also a little bit more nuance with how you use things, so using Barbed Shot 2 seconds before Bestial Wrath isn't a great idea, just like how using Cobra Shot too soon before a kill command isn't a great idea because its cooldown reduction is wasted by the GCD. That said, you maybe want to break that rule if you, you maybe want to use a Barbed Shot before kill command because otherwise you'd lose your Frenzy buff on your pet. These things elevate what would otherwise be a very simple spec to being one that actually has a lot more nuance going on, so it's got a small number of abilities, but those abilities are all very interactive with each other. Of course, this stuff is all beefed out by the talents. So let's talk about talents. And the 15 tier starts off with Killer Instinct, which increases the kill command damage to targets below 35% health, which is great for certain fights, and it emphasizes the importance of executing Bestial Wrath correctly. Then Animal Companion is basically just Haiti, it kind of gives you a second pet, and Dire Beast is a new spell that costs 25 focus, has a 15-second cooldown, and increases your haste by 10% for 8 seconds, which is, maybe enough that it's pretty good if you line it up with a Bestial Wrath window. Then the 30 tier has Scent of Blood, which causes Barbed Shot to generate a bit more focus. It's got one with the pack, which increases the proc rate of Wild Call, so you'll get a bit more randomness in the spec, but what matters is that more procs of Barbed Shot mean that it'll be easier to maintain uptime of your pet's Frenzy stacks, which is quite nice. Then Chimera Shot is back, and it's still a focus generator that cleaves. The 45 tier is largely the same, but Natural Mending is there, and it reduces the cooldown of Exhilaration effectively. Then the 60 tier kicks off with Venomous Bite, which causes Cobra Shot to also reduce the cooldown of Bestial Wrath every time it's used. Now, this on top of the cooldown reduction from Barbed Shots means that your Bestial Wrath has some pretty crazy high uptime. It also really makes the spec just be a bit more of a fast pace, which is great if you want that. Then Thrill of the Hunt causes Barbed Shots to give you a buff that stacks up to 3 times and has an 8-second duration, which doesn't really change your gameplay. If you're already maintaining Frenzy stacks on your pet, it doesn't do anything, but I suppose this just doubles down on that mechanic and it makes it more important to execute it right. Then Murder of Crows is back and it operates exactly as you would expect. Now, the 75 tier is the same as the other specs, and the 90 tier is the same as Legion. So let's cap it off with the 100 tier, and that begins with Aspect of the Beast, which is pretty different to Legion. So in Legion, it augmented your kill command based on your pet spec, but now it is a passive increase to their damage and a 50% amplification of their passive effects. So you'll get 15% leech, or 7.5% extra health, or 12% extra run speed. Then Killer Cobra is identical to Legion and essentially serves to really amplify the importance of your Bestial Wrath window, which is pretty important. It just means you want to enter Bestial Wrath with loads of focus and just be ready for it. Then this also amplifies potentially some other talents. For an example, it gives you an extremely powerful execute damage if it's paired with the Killer Instinct talent. But as always, this is something that will be simmed out on a per fight basis. Then Spitting Cobra has been brought over from Survival, and it's pretty simple. A Cobra slithers in and it spits at the target for 20 seconds, generating you 40 focus over its duration, which is probably quite nice to have if you're, say, going into a Bestial Wrath window. So overall, it's a spec that kind of got a bad rap, but BFA improves on Legion in every regard as far as I can see. It doubles down on Dire Frenzy, renaming it Barbed Shot and making it a baseline part of the spec. This means that you no longer have to choose between it and Stomp within the same row, which is great. I love a spec that's fast-paced, but what's interesting is the execution, and I think you do have to execute the BM rotation with say, more precision than a Fury Warrior. Overcasting Cobra Shot will focus starve you, but casting it reduces the cooldown of kill command, so you need to navigate those two extremes well. Since it reduces the cooldown by 1 second, it actually narrows the acceptable cast window for Cobra Shot, which makes it a bit harder to use correctly. The same goes for Barbed Shot. You want to ensure that you're not casting one of these like 3 seconds before Bestial Wrath. I mean, unless you want to like refresh your Frenzy or whatever. You don't want to waste the cooldown reduction ideally, but all of these things make it fast-paced, but they demand a level of care and precision, which I have found surprisingly engaging. The only critique is maybe that AoE is a little bit in the simple side because it's mainly just maintaining Beast Cleave, but I think the rotation overall has enough going on that the swap to multi-shot is enough. Of course, Stomp exists as a talent, and you can do, say, a Killer Stampede, which is pretty fun. Then BM has the unique ability of being able to do its full rotation while moving, and that's kind of insane for a ranged class, and it absolutely is one of the strengths of this spec particularly. So overall, I like it. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think that there is plenty of gameplay in the execution of this spec. So sure, the default number of buttons is quite low, but the level of interactivity between those buttons is quite high, which for me makes up for it, which results in a spec that I think maps onto WoW's content grade. It's not overly complex and obtuse, but it's still fast-paced and engaging, which gives you a good gameplay flow that still puts the emphasis on the fight at hand. So, have the BFA changes been enough to pull me back to the Hunter overall? That's kind of hard to say. So I was surprised by how much I enjoyed the tweaks to the Beast Mastery formula, and I think that Survival is a great spec that moves on from Legion really well. Both of them are maybe on the simple side, maybe they're not, but look, I think they're fast-paced and they're quite fun, they're quite engaging, so that's really most of what I'm looking for in a spec. After all, my main area of interest is the mechanics of the encounter, because that's something that will vary a lot over the expansion, while the classes will stay largely similar. As for Marksmanship, it's just not mega fun to me. I think it does answer what many people didn't like about Legion Marksmanship, but for me, it's just left it being a bit slow-paced, a bit boring, and a bit less interesting than the other specs. It does pick up in AoE, but I find myself not enjoying it a massive amount, but that said, it's inoffensive. It's not going to get in the way of fights being enjoyable, so I could totally roll with it. You also just across the board benefit from Hunter bullshit, BM especially because it does its full rotation while moving, but Survival can hop all over the place, we all get misdirection, we get talents like Binding Shot, you've got FD, Turtle, Disengage, aspect of the Cheetah. Being a Hunter just feels really powerful because you've got, with your personal toolkit, an answer to so much, and this is something that's further augmented by your pet changes, which, sure, it gives you nice passes, but it also gives you the Bloodlust, the Damage Reduction CD, and Master's Call, which is super handy to have. So that's it for the Hunter in Battle for Azeroth. Overall, I'm actually pretty happy. So I think Survival was a great improvement over what we had in Legion, even though that said, I did start to enjoy the Legion Survival Hunter once it got more in the way of just stats in general, especially haste, and it got a bit faster. But that said, yeah, I think BFA moved on Survival really well. As for Marksmanship, well, lukewarm for me, but it's rather inoffensive and it fits into the game pretty well. I think for a lot of Hunters that seems to be what they want, though I guess I would maybe prefer a different direction. That said, I wasn't a big fan of the whole vulnerable mechanic anyway. And as for Beast Mastery, well, look, Beast Mastery got a bad rap, absolutely, in Legion, and there was a lot of good reasons for that, but I think that the Cobra Shot mechanic, and especially having Frenzy Management now being a baseline part of the spec with Barbed Shot, I think that actually adds enough into those, that core set of abilities that it's pretty fast-paced. There's loads of cooldown reduction mechanics, and you actually have to execute things with a decent enough amount of precision in order to not mess it all up. So I think that, again, has moved on BM quite well. So I'd say overall for the Hunter, I'm neutral in Marksmanship, and I'm happy with the other two. Overall, that means the Hunter is coming out ahead. Will I main it? Probably not, because I want to tank and I love the Monk, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's it for the Hunter overall, I think, moving in a good direction. So thank you for watching this video, and a big thank you to Icy Veins for sponsoring this series, and you can see their class guides down in the description. They all have a Battle for Azeroth page that, will be really useful for you. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.